Known for his straight talking, pull no punches, it is, of course, the former head of Royal Protection and the former Scotland Yard Chief Superintendent, Dai Davis, who joins me from Carnarvon. Is that right, Dai?
Well, near Carnarvon, from Llanrug, which is 3 miles outside.
And of course, it'd be amiss of me not to mention anything about your name. Good old Welsh name, Dai Davis. That's proper Welsh, isn't it?
Well, it is proper Welsh, but of course it's David. And the full title is David Owen Seaborn Davis. And some members of the posher side of the family have always used it as a double barrel name. In fact, William, my son, who you know, his wife is now Mrs. Seaborn Davis. So some people like to call themselves posh.
Yeah, this
I'm
is
just a peasant.
Well, actually, speak about your son, William, good friend of mine. We did a show for Channel 5 called It Takes a Thief to Catch a Thief. And it was a tremendous time. I got to know him, and he's a great young man. And he's also serving in the Met Police, isn't he, in London? And so, you know, he's got his hands full, hasn't he?
Well, he has. He's a sergeant now. He's been promoted. Obviously, working with you was good for him.
Well, I'm not too sure about that.
I think it was, actually. He loved it.
Yeah, we had a great time, and we traveled up and down the country helping people with their security and, you know, showing them the tricks of the trade, as it were.
Yeah, we watched every episode, I can assure you.
Speaking of tricks of the trade, Dai, you've got plenty of tricks up your sleeve, given your reputation and, of course, more importantly, your CV. Very colourful. And I'm really excited about having you on today because it's not often that I get to speak or interview an ex-copper. It's normally the other way around, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, but for the grace of God, I can assure you, I would be interviewed as well. So no worries.
Fantastic. Well, Dai, let's start from the top then. Tell the viewers a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your journey, actually, because it's quite colourful. I mean, I've read up a lot about you. I've seen clips of you on Good Morning Britain with Piers Morgan, Sky News, Jeremy Vine. You've done a lot of things, you know, and you're a security expert now, an investigator and stuff like that. But tell us a little bit about your time as the Royal Protection, head of Royal Protection for the royal family.
Well, thank you. Well, I'm 69 years of age now, although I don't feel it. And I was appointed back in 93, 94. I was a chief superintendent then. And they wanted somebody to actually pull together 3 divisions. The uniform side, the people you see traveling the world, and the Special Escort Group. So amazingly, they chose me. It was like putting Dracula in charge of a blood bank, frankly.
And what did that role entail?
Well, what it meant was that I took command of what had previously had lots of chiefs and perhaps not enough Indians, which is true of today's police force, but we can come on to that. But essentially, it was to bring a street cop operational. I've been combating the IRA and criminals all my life. They only got me in an office at least a few months in my whole career. So I'd been a street cop from an undercover vice when I was a young constable and sergeant all the way up to the rank. And I was very proud of the fact I'd been in charge of West London Territorial Support Group. They're the people who go in generally when everybody else goes out. And being a Welshman, a little one at that, I always led from the front because normally the missiles would miss me and hit the tall buggers behind me.
Come into that, Dai. Is there one thing that sticks in your mind when you were serving that still lives with you to this day?
Yes, I think it was the death of Diana. And I got that phone call in the very early hours to tell me something that completely shocked me and the nation. And the rest is history. But interestingly enough, I've spent the last 3 years as a lecturer now researching every possible angle of it. And I'm now a bit like you. I'm a historian and I love history, always have done. And I now lecture on Cunard and other high-profile cruises on the history of the royal family, their attacks on them, which is quite amazing. And I explain why it is, even with sort of 500 men and women and support staff and the auspices of Scotland Yard, what an incredible job it is. And of course, we look after all their palaces, their castles. When they travel abroad, my officers went with them. And it was quite a job. I don't think at the time I quite realized the pressure, but I was pressure.
Yeah, Dai, just paint a little picture here, because, you know, we see movies, of course, here in the UK, you know, CIA and all that kind of stuff in America, and FBI and royal protection, presidential protection around Trump and all these great figures in history. I mean, Is it as real as what we see on our TV screens, or, you know, the secrecy and the stuff surrounding it? Is it shrouded in all of that?
Yes and no is the answer to the question. It isn't like you see on the movies. Police officers who do this job are normally very well selected, highly trained in a wide variety from firearms to advanced first aid. They're exceptional men and women, and there weren't many women in my day, but the ones who were there in the 90s were exceptionally good. And I say it again, the officers by and large were good, particularly on those who travel worldwide and often in remote places have to make those decisions without any recourse. And the normal rank is an inspector or chief inspector or up to superintendent for one of the more senior royals. And so, yes, I had great respect, but equally, some of them had lost sight that they were police officers working for the Met and not working for the royals. And I did feel that a breath of fresh air. And in fact, somebody said to me, "You're the titular head." Well, being a Welshman, I didn't know what titular meant. I looked it up, and it means in name only. Well, he certainly got a shock that I certainly was never thought of as a name only boss. And I walked the shop floor, whether it was 2 a.m., 3 a.m. at Windsor Castle or anywhere. They would have a shock seeing me turn up at that time in the morning, and to see that what I thought in my pinnacle was going on and the orders going down was actually being implemented. Because in my time, the IRA or the provisional IRA, as well as those we call fixated, there was a constant problem. And the last problem was the press, particularly the Sun and the News of the World in those days.
Yeah, we're going to come to the press in a moment and how they've played into what's been happening with our police force and the politicization of it, possibly as a result of that. But I just want to mention something, bring something up that you mentioned about, you know, how the protection officers have a very challenging job to do, and quite clearly, and we commend those who serve in the police force, of course. But as you know, I've always been quite supportive of the police anyway, in general. Obviously I'm a law-abiding citizen now, and I appreciate the work of the police, but it's becoming more apparent to a lot of people. I don't know whether this is because of the media, that our police force is becoming politicized. There was a study done by Oxford University, and they were looking into the interactions between politics and the police. And the study, which I've read this morning, was put together. And it's interesting to note that there has been a level of infiltration from politics into the police. But I understand historically this has happened, you know, so it's not a new phenomena. It's happened before. I mean, do you think our police force, given the pressure that they're under, for example, we had the Black Lives Matter marches, we've had Extinction Rebellion at a time when the nation was in lockdown, yet the police were told that they let the riots and protests, I say riots, not everyone was rioting, by the way, the protests continue, and they just had to manage it. So, I mean, it's been very difficult for the police, isn't it, given the political climate that we're in, Dai?
It is. And of course, the generation leading the police force today are very different to my generation. When I joined, most senior officers had been in the services, had been often in the war. So you had a very different caliber of men and women, or very few women in those days, actually leading. What you have now, and I tried to go on the senior command course to be a chief constable, and I've got to tell you, they said after 3 days of assessments, intelligence tests, they said, 1, who sent him? 2, don't send him again. And 3, how on earth did he get in the police force? So you have a very different caliber of people. I'm a great believer, if you're bad, I'll nick you. And I'll do any way within the law to do that. And if I get you one way, if you're a thief or a crook or a violent man, if I can't get you one way, I'll get you another. And I think that's perfectly fair. They have a balance, but I went on this course, and I have to say the majority of those on it were left-leaning, as I would call, and I'm a middle of the road. I'm not a right or left. I'm, like most people in this country, in the middle. The word reasonable. And I don't think occasionally the leadership have shown that kind of reasonable leadership. It is difficult. On the one hand, you don't want to cause a riot, but on the other hand, you can't have one rule for one section of the community who, by sheer force or dressing up in black uniforms and all the rest of it, stick 2 fingers at what the rest of us have to do. It's a balance, but I'm a great believer, and I did public order for many, many years. I was an advanced public order commander. You have to capture the ground early. You have to put your troops where you can protect vulnerable buildings and people, and make sure then that you control them. You control them. An example of this is Notting Hill Carnival, which I did for many, many years. And again, what I learned there, you have safety zones. And when you have 1 million people all milling in very narrow streets, you have to then think of it outside the box. And I've used this in the Middle East and other places where I've advised large gatherings, particularly in the Muslim community, when they're dressed, men and women, in these long shrouds, that if you had to evacuate quickly, wouldn't allow them. So my 52 years of experience worldwide serves me well. And the other thing is, having worked overseas, murder cases and things in Japan, I've learned really that quite often British police, the ones I know, have a narrow outlook. And I wish they would travel a bit more and mix more and learn more. And you can learn from others, and don't be afraid to ask. And that's, we're all, and I learned this when we were dealing with the IRA. In those days, we all kept our information to ourselves, our intelligence. In a modern world, you can't have borders. You can't have one unit not sharing. Obviously, if you're tasking a criminal, you don't tell everybody how and what you're doing. But in the broad sense, the more intelligence you can share, the more you can convert that into direct action, the better you are as a police officer. And again, I'm sorry to say, I think there are a lot of policemen and women who are not well led in this country today. And I'm sad to say that.
Yeah, I was going to come to that, Dai, because obviously we've seen police officers killed in the line of duty, in recent years, terrorist attacks and many other things. And, I've always advocated that our police force are there to protect and serve. I think they do a fantastic job. The idea of them enforcing law, we saw the George Floyd thing, obviously, which sparked a huge reaction globally, actually, and here in the UK as well. And they've got a very difficult task because they're damned if they do and they're damned if they don't. And
yes.
So I've been sympathetic towards that and thinking, how can they police our streets safely if a police officer is concerned in the back of his mind because of the political ramifications? If I do this, then politically I might get into trouble, and we know because we've seen police commissioners now, which is a new, well, not new thing now, but, we have police commissioners, most of which they've not served within the forces or the police force, certainly, but some of them are ex-solicitors or being politicians. I wondered if this whole mix of the police and politicians has become a real challenge to our current police force at the moment when they're serving on our streets.
Well, it's a very good question. It's a long question and deserves quite an answer. I had the pleasure of lecturing on ethics and morality at Cardiff University and ethical leadership. And, being a leader, it's having the courage to do what is right. And I would pass that on down to a constable. Providing you know the law, you should do what is legally right and morally right. And I have to say, I've got a great respect for a lot of policemen and women, but there are a lot of them who are lazy. And I have been on many programs defending occasionally some of the cuts, because I can assure you, like a cruise ship, if it starts to sink, 20% will run around like headless chickens, trying to do the right thing. Most people will sit in the middle and do very little, and the other third will panic. In the police service, there are about 20 to 30% who are fantastic, who work hard. There's a huge majority in the middle who will do what they have to. And then you have a small minority who, frankly, shouldn't be in the police force, are lazy, unfit. And they're the ones I've always tackled. And I can't mention a case I'm dealing with at the moment. But it's a bit like sort of Staffordshire NHS, where babies die. There are police officers who simply fail to do their job properly, and the public suffer. They're the ones we should be rooting out. They're the ones, a bit like nurses who don't do their jobs, or firemen, or anyone else in society. But let's not elevate police, nurses to a level that some of them certainly don't deserve to be there. In respect of your politics, yes, here in North Wales, we have an ex-inspector on 72,000 a year, plus an entourage now. Not they, but the police commissioners have spent 8.9 million on PR and self-promotion. Many of them have been investigated over alleged allegations of misuse. It is a nightmare. And the old police authority wasn't perfect, but at least you had people who knew. They were elected people, you had JPs and so on and so forth. Now we have the ridiculous scenario here in Wales. We have an ex-inspector on 72,000 actually supervising a chief constable who presumably has taken 25, 30 years or whatever to get there on 140,000 a year, controlling a budget of many, many millions. Now, in my simple brain, there's a problem with that. And again, how can a police inspector, that's the highest he got in his whatever career, actually be supervising a man who spent a career, presumably working very hard to get to chief constable? You couldn't make it up.
So you're not a fan of police commissioners then, Dai? Would that be right to say?
No, I went on radio when they were announced and argued strongly against them. And I've been proven right. If you said to the people of North Wales or most Welsh, who is your police commissioner, with the exception of Alan Michael, I think, who is quite a famous politician, a Labour politician in his own right. I mean, he's applying to be again, and he must be in his late 70s. Goodness me. Give somebody else a chance if you're going to have this ridiculous position. I would say to him, give somebody else a chance to be a police commissioner. But for goodness sake, get somebody in military or high profile role who can bring talent, skill and knowledge, not yet another politician who wants to jump on the gravy train, as a lot of them do.
Yeah, I've noticed that. In fact, I was made aware of something this week. Some friends or people I know, colleagues, I should say, they've showed some interest in wanting to put themselves forward for election, which I think the elections for police commissioners are in May next year, if that's right. We got elections here in Wales as well. Yeah, I mean, I know some people who've mentioned the idea of putting themselves forward for election for that job, and yet they've got no experience. They've never served in the police force in any capacity whatsoever, or in the armed forces. But yet, because they've been involved in politics, they think they can play a part as a police commissioner. I find it ever so strange, really. I mean, I'd rather have someone with some experience of actual policing,
Yes.
than someone who's just got some political background. Well, Dai, there's a couple of things I want to ask you, because, of course, as we know in the media as well, with the press, where Meghan and Harry have been, the spotlight has been on them, hasn't it, over the last few months. And of course, we can see what's been happening. I wonder what you think about them forging their own way, whether or not that weakens the royal family and their reputation.
Well, it's a question I've been asked many times. I think Harry has been to the same school of advice as his uncle Andrew. In other words, pretty poor. I think it's his choice, but a bit like a company director who's always had the company car, the company house, etc., etc. When you leave that company, you give up the company car, you give up the company, what have you, but you don't call yourself a prince. You can be a plain Mr. From now on, and she can be plain Mrs. Windsor, whatever they choose, Mountbatten with Windsor, whatever they choose to be. I don't think if he hadn't been a prince, would any of us give one iota to what these two think. She's an actress, and fair enough, she, like you and I, are allowed an opinion, as is Harry. And in fairness, I think he would be less constrained. But if you actually look at their global experience, one is an actress and one was a helicopter pilot. Very brave, no doubt, no issues with that, but a very privileged young man. And that privilege doesn't allow you to lecture the rest of us, sometimes hypocritically. And the same with her. Who cares, frankly, what a woman of her background actually thinks, and how dare she lecture the rest of us on what we should or shouldn't be do? I think they're a complete mishmash, and I don't think they'll make any difference to the royal family as a whole. But all these knocks against Andrew, against Charles, and if you actually look into some of his behavior in the past, you will see, as I do, that there are some pretty aspects that may come out again, because the press, the media, they're very good. They're like detectives. They can winkle out all your bad misdoings and who you've mixed with. And I always say, and you would know this well, who you mix with, who your friends are, who you take money from. There's no such thing as a free meal. And one thing the royals are brilliant at is getting people to give money to their causes or even to themselves. And I don't think that's a good thing.
Yeah, well, coming to Prince Andrew, of course, it's a massive, massive case. He's been called the Air Miles Andrew because of his globe trotting around the world and rubbing shoulders with the rich and famous. It's well documented, of course. Given what's happened with Epstein, you know, he convicted paedophile, and what's happened since, and what the press have been reporting, I mean, his relationship with Epstein was not good for him. I mean, it's clear for anybody to know that, to see that. Do you think he was wise in giving that interview? I know it's an old interview now on the BBC. Do you think that was a wise decision that he made?
No, it's very unwise, as it's proven to be. I mean, it's completely destroyed his life in one sense. He has literally no credibility, and yet, in truth, nobody has found him guilty of anything. And it's been trialed by media in one sense, albeit that the FBI and then the attorney in New York State and Florida have taken an interest. But in fairness to him, he has been struck off the royal family without anyone finding him guilty of anything other than the failure to answer questions, as I see it, honestly, a failure to take empathy with the victims. But again, one has to be very careful what we say. And again, I know a lot more than I can tell you, because as you know, I spent 4 or 5 hours with Panorama when they did their program. Unfortunately, most of it, for whatever legal or other reasons, was cut out. And I had about a minute after 5 hours of interview. But I've seen some of the depositions. And as somebody who's spent a lifetime investigating now at home and abroad, I think there are certain questions to Andrew, and I wish somebody would ask them properly, face to face. And if evidence comes to light, or there is evidence, then that should be under caution. Like all of us, as you well know, and I know, if you suspect a crime is committed, then you should interview that person. And aiding and abetting, counselling and procuring the commission of a criminal offence at home or abroad in a sexual matter is an offence that can be investigated by the British authorities. Why Scotland Yard, twice now, having given the opportunity, having seen presumably the statements I have, why they decided in their wisdom. We haven't had a proper, but as with this government, nobody wants to give you evidence, and I want evidence. And if I see evidence, then I want answers. And if people don't give me answers, then it raises my hackles. Because the truth is, if you don't investigate things, if you don't look at those who can give you material evidence, you will never find evidence. And it seems to me there's a whole range of people who could provide alibi or key witness, which would take this matter one way or the other. It isn't rocket science as far as he's concerned. It is a matter of going through the logs, going through those who accompany him, police and others, and asking the salient question. If then they all corroborate what he says, end of story, and he can go back to being Prince Andrew.
Yeah, very good, very good. Well, Dai, listen, our time is up. I know it's gone really quick. I wanted to cover a bit more, but because of the space of the program, I just want to ask you one more thing before you go. If you could sit down with Boris Johnson, Prime Minister, what would you say to him?
Well, I know Mr. Johnson. He helped me when I took on the Brunei royal family, believe it or not, because they swindled my client who lived in Jersey out of millions and millions. So Mr. Johnson, I knew him. I've seen him a number of times over that case. He used to call me that copper. That was his, you're that copper. Anyway, I wasn't a copper. I was an investigator by that time. I would say to him, get a grip on your ministers, get a grip on this nation of ours, and put people like the Welsh Secretary, First Minister, and the Scottish in their time. You are in charge of the United Kingdom. The two respective ministers are in charge of a tiny population in comparison. And I do think that he should get a grip and show some real leadership, as indeed he did in dealing with the EU and still does to a point. I was a fan. I'm starting to doubt slightly his abilities now in the face of a crisis. But I'll keep the door open for a little while longer. Politics is a strange business, but my goodness, we need leadership like never before. And that leadership should be turned into a vision of excellence. And I do think we've lost sight of the bigger picture as a nation. And we've lost sight, people like my wife, who's now waiting 2 years for two hip operations. It is a scandal. And the way we are forgetting people who are cancerous and all the rest of it, I think it's a scandal, and I hold a number of people to account. And sadly, we've been cowed, or a lot of people, into being cowed that this is dreadful. You know, the flu factors and cancer far outweigh who people are dying. Now, I know that's controversial, but as you know, it doesn't hold me back. That's my belief, and I'm entitled to it.
Yes, well, we're a non-political show, this is, and I get to edit everything anyway, so we can say what we want, Dai. That's the reality. And the truth is that that sentiment and feeling, a lot of people feel the same way. You know, they feel as if, you know, what's been happening with the COVID-19, the pandemic, the handling. I mean, you're in Wales, as you know, we're in full lockdown. And yet, I think when we went into when the statement was made the day before, only 3 deaths in Wales were recorded, and yet, you know, Mark Drakeford down at Cardiff Bay expects Westminster to pay for it when he's been told categorically there's no money for that. You know, and
and also he's 3.3 million, population of 60 million, who, by and large, in terms of finances. But the other thing is Mark and his ministers, are they all going to take a 70% pay cut? Oh, sorry. 2/3 of their money. They're sitting there with big pensions, all the rest of it, while the rest. Now, I run a country house, little B&B here. We are losing thousands this week because people have cancelled. Is he going to? And because I'm like you, probably a company director, we don't get anything back. We don't get anything back. Nobody cares a sugar. But if I wasn't a police pensioner and this was my livelihood, we would be in serious trouble. And yet again, I'd be then asking the government or the dole to pay for me. It is wrong, and I'm sorry. If there was evidence to show Aberystwyth or whatever was causing it, then I'd say, fine, you shut that cafe. What we seem not to have done is to look at it in a proper targeted way at those key evidenced areas where the you know, like nightclubs. If you put 500 people into a nightclub and they're dancing close together and kissing each other, the reality is that probably would affect, and then they go home. So we need to target it far better. And I'm completely against this lockdown, totally against it. I don't see the evidence. And I agree with 3,500 scientists, academics, who have written to say this is nonsense.
Well, Dai, our time is up. I actually agree with you on that, so you'll be pleased to know. Thank you so much for coming on the show today, and I hope to get you back on another time, run some commentary on some other issues. But to our viewers, thank you very much for taking the time to watch today's broadcast. I hope you found it interesting. I certainly did. And Dai, if our viewers want to get in touch with you, because I know you're available for some public speaking when lockdown is over, you do quite a bit of that. Where can folks find more information about you, Dai?
Well, I have a number of agents. Most of them don't give me any work, but I'm on specialistspeakers.com, and if you put Dai Davis and contact them, I don't want any hate mail like you, so I won't give my own number out. But seriously, I'm a big boy. I'm a trained how to deal with anyone, really, physically and mentally. So I'm quite happy if people want to approach me, I'll give them either agree with them or give them to. In fact, got to tell you this, we're off air, but on the cruise ships, they say when I lecture on cruise ship, I bet you wouldn't say that at home. Well, anybody who knows me knows full well I do, and I have, and there's a lot more to come out, I can assure you.
Dai, thank you ever so much, my friend. It's been great chatting to you. And listen, when this is over, I'm going to come to Carnarvon, or near Carnarvon where you are, and me and my wife are going to book ourselves into your B&B. How's that?
Well, you'll be there as my guest. You might have to bring a bottle or 2 or 3 of wine.
Well, whiskey is my preferred option, but I'll go with the
you
wine.
Bring your own whiskey and bring wine for me. How's that?
No problem. Dai, thank you very much. I look forward to catching you soon. Thanks for joining us on Rich Politics.
No worries. Take care now.
Bye. Bye.